Hi everyone, this is Paul here from the Magdalene Centre. Today I'm doing a report on Pluto Retrograde in Capricorn, which begins on the 21st of April and finishes on the 30th of September. And we'll be highlighting some of the key themes that this particular retrograde emphasises to us and what it all kind of means. Before I do that, I just want to clarify, as I always do, that astrology doesn't control us in any way. It's merely a means of understanding what the energies around us are doing, what kinds of spiritual lessons they bring with them, and how we can more consciously work with them by understanding what kind of things we need to be working on within ourselves, so that we then come from an empowered position of responding to events rather than blindly reacting. Now, Pluto retrogrades, this is a time of turning inwards, but with Pluto, it's worth understanding what he stands for before trying to explain the retrograde itself. So Pluto is that force within the psyche that is about facing our own shadow side, facing our own negativity, and purifying the psyche of all the dross, of all the emotional attachments, the old outmoded ways of being, and releasing these so that we can embrace a more empowered way of approaching things. And Pluto tends to do things through polarizing different aspects into the extremes. Now, what's very common in human nature is that we're not particularly comfortable with facing our own shadow side. We try and actively suppress it, but we can't completely suppress it because the unconscious is more powerful than the conscious by the sheer scale of it. And if we try and just ignore it or pretend it doesn't exist, it will still come out in one way or another, either through us behaving in unusual ways because that energy is coming up and kind of hijacking the conscious mind, if you like, or we project it onto other people and we proclaim them to be bad or evil when actually what they're doing is they're serving as a hook for our own psychic projections. But the only way for us to actually truly engage with the transformative work of Pluto is to acknowledge that negativity within us. This also isn't particularly easy because no one truly wants to acknowledge the dark side and acknowledge the fact that we're not all light, we're not all loving, we're not all the positive traits that we want ourselves to be. We also have the negative ones, or the shadow ones, which are the unintegrated aspects where we've rejected parts of our consciousness and try to bury it. But there's only so long we can bury any issues until they start coming up before, because we all have a repression mechanism in the mind to try and keep certain things out of conscious awareness, but it takes a lot of energy to maintain this repression mechanism, and eventually the subconscious mind, which Pluto kind of deals with that domain, its constant upward pressure or helping to manifest certain external events to help us understand what's going on internally overcomes that repression mechanism and it comes up into conscious awareness. It could be through sudden surge of powerful negative emotions. Well, I say negative, they're the more base emotions or the lower vibration ones, but they're only there because we haven't dealt with the initial charges or causes of those emotions. So for us to work with Pluto retrograde constructively, we have to have the courage to face whatever negativity is within us, because all the negativity we see around us and all the shadow destructive sides of human nature that we're witnessing are the projection of each one of us projecting our own negativity onto other people, onto institutions, onto the environment, because we don't want to acknowledge the fact that we have this negative side, this destructive side, which undermines our well-being, undermines our integrity, and if we don't deal with it, it ends up subverting our behaviours and we engage in more destructive actions without intending to. But if we do have the courage to face this negativity, to own it and take responsibility for it, then the shadow side of ourselves loses its power over us. It stops having that ability to undermine our objectives or undermine our integrity by subverting our conscious objectives. If we shine the light of conscious awareness on it, and we're not trying to destroy the shadow, or we're not trying to pretend it doesn't exist. We shine the light of awareness on it and recognise and accept that side of ourselves, and through this we understand the need to transform this part of our nature into a more empowered version, which is, guided by love rather than being hidden out of rejection of the self. Because if we continue to resist our own shadow nature, it will continue to persist, and the reality around us will continue to mirror back to us those issues. So it's the whole what we resist persists. So if we don't want to keep encountering conflicts or power plays or the negative destructive side of ourselves through other people, then we have to take ownership of that and take responsibility for our own internal nature, and take responsibility for healing it. Because usually it's issues that we haven't dealt with from a long time ago. They could be old wounds, old pains, and we weren't ready to face them at the time, so we tried to bury them out of conscious awareness. But eventually those things have to come up to the surface, otherwise they just mutate within us and create a nucleus for that darkness to occur. But with Pluto was first discovered when nuclear energy was discovered, appropriately enough. But there's two ways that nuclear energy can be harnessed, either through this destructive version, which is fission, which is splitting everything apart. So it's when we have those explosive bursts of emotions because we've not integrated our different parts of our psyche, we've not brought things into collective whole and purified any of the impurities within us. Then it becomes that explosive side that releases a lot of destruction in our personal environment, into our lives, and causes major damage. But the other nuclear force is fusion. So this is the achieving the essential unity, which is the higher nature of Scorpio. It's overcoming all the different dualities within us and recognising that at the heart of them they all stem from the same source. We're all part of the same force, so we all have a connection to it deep within us. But we can only achieve that deep sense of connection, deep sense of inner security, if we're prepared to face all these challenges within us. So with Pluto turning retrograde, effectively all the energy of Pluto is turned inwards, and we're asked to do the work of going into our own psyches, and going to our own psyches, and to have the courage to face where we engage in destructive behaviour or power plays based on the fear of being controlled. Because control is a major issue that Pluto challenges to overcome. The only way to transform that is to shine the light of awareness within ourselves and understand the necessity of surrendering that, and to surrender to the mysteries around us, and recognising that control is ultimately illusion. It's one that we all try to maintain, but that illusion can also bring about a lot of destruction, because whilst we're trying to control everything, we end up inadvertently initiating power plays over the people out of a desire to control the situation, and this continues to escalate until we reach an impasse where things explode out of control. But if we're prepared to, in terms of whenever we have an interaction that triggers emotional issues or seems to be devolving into a power play, it's important that we take a step back, breathe, and look within ourselves and ask, why is this particular conflict happening? Is there some part of myself that I'm projecting onto another person in order to avoid dealing with it consciously? Because Pluto is about that polarization. It's the identifying all the different dualities and splitting them into their positive and negative counterparts, and having the courage to face the negative dysfunctional side and jettison it from our consciousness. But it requires the courage to do this. Doesn't happen automatically, but if we don't engage with the process consciously, then often we find ourselves in crisis situations where the only way out is through transformation. If we're prepared to work consciously with it and engage in that transformation process from the get-go, we make things a lot smoother for ourselves, and we achieve a greater degree of self-understanding. Because the thing is, the more we understand our own shadow sides, the more we understand or can show compassion and understanding towards other people when they engage in destructive behaviour. It doesn't mean that we condone their behaviour or we think there's anything particularly right about it and we don't necessarily agree with it. But if we do the shadow work of understanding our own power drives, understanding how our own shadow side works, then when we see it in other people, we're less likely to jump into judgment and projecting our own issues onto other people and proclaiming they're evil, which is the easy way out. We look at them and understand what is going on in them. We seek to understand what could have potentially caused this person to get to reach this place, because none of us are born inherently evil. None of us are born necessarily with a desire to kill or anything. The destructive side of the human psyche is built up through conditioning over time. And if we do the work of understanding the conditioning influences we've been through, understanding the emotional charges that are built up within our psyche that we need to diffuse, then it's a lot easier to understand what other people are going through, and it also means that we could potentially serve as an influencer which diffuses conflict rather than initiates it. But it takes the courage to go within ourselves and face the shadow side, because it's not particularly pleasant to face this aspect of ourselves. Let's face it, how many of us actively really want to acknowledge our own destructive side, or the negative aspects of our own psyche, or the destructive qualities within our own egos? So Pluto is all about developing that integrity through that uncompromising drive for truth. And often the truth can be very painful when we first encounter it, especially if it's having to recognise our own destructive side. But it's only through through embracing truth and going through that transformation that we can experience true peace, where we're no longer at conflict within ourselves, and therefore we're not initiating conflicts with other people because we're needing other people to serve as hooks for our projections. So when we do the work of Pluto and we transform our base desires, our base nature, through going through that fire of transformation to rid ourselves of impurity, a bit like when a base metal is put into the fire to stamp out the impurities within it, the psyche has to go through the same process and have all those negative tendencies and all those negative attachments ripped out. So it's like opening the old wounds up, dredging out all the poison that's built up inside because we've just stuck a plaster on it rather than going within it, allowing it to heal properly. And by pulling out all that emotional poison and releasing it and not releasing it onto other people, it's releasing it consciously and surrendering this aspect of the ego which is powered by old wounds and the sense of being a victim. If we have the courage to go within ourselves and transform the deepest levels of our psyche, then external events cease to have power over us, because true power lies within us. It's not this power that we see around us where people are trying to exercise power over one another. This is the shadow manifestation of power. The only true power that really exists is the power within every single one of us. But we have to be willing to take responsibility for going within our own selves, through facing our own shadow side, our own darkness, and learning to accept it in order to transform it. Because if we don't learn to accept our own destructive natures, it will never be transformed. It will just be suppressed, where it just gathers more power and eventually come breaking through and potentially cause something destructive to happen. So if we want to truly empower ourselves, we have to be willing to do the work of going within the deepest parts of our psyche and exploring the shadow terrain, exploring where do we hold on to old hurts, where do we cling to the role of being a victim because we don't want to let go of conditioning, because we may define ourselves by old wounding events, but what's happened to us are merely influences. They're not who we are. What's happened has happened. We can't change that, but we can change our relationship to it by letting go of the attachments to it, by recognizing that we're a different person now to who we were back then. Ideally we're stronger, we're more self-aware, we've learned to let go of issues, and it's by becoming present with these shadow sides and learn to accept them and learn to love those aspects of ourselves, that they can be transformed through spiritual alchemy, and the old layers of illusion, old layers of wounds and old layers of past conditioning and negative influences can be purged from our psyches. And obviously with Pluto going through Capricorn, Capricorn is it's a transpersonal sign. Capricorn isn't exactly one that we easily identify with the everyday side of things. We usually think of Capricorn and we look at institutions like banks, like government, like religious authorities, and we often see them as impersonal structures, but what we need to understand is that these structures only exist because of people, and the people within them are as human as we are. And if all we ever do is project our own destructive nature onto them, nothing changes. Because the thing is, for anything to continue to exist or to maintain its power, we have to believe it has importance, or we have to keep projecting our own issues onto that so that we're not transforming it. But the thing is, if we stop giving energy to something, then either it has to transform or it fades away. So if we want things to transform in the external world and for things to move in a positive direction, we have to work on ourselves. There's no two ways about it, because if we're not prepared to do the work within ourselves, how can we rightfully ask anyone else to do the work? Because they could just literally turn around and say, well, you're not doing it, so that's a bit hypocritical, don't you think? So Pluto Retrograde is a time for us to get real with ourselves, to go within ourselves and recognise, where do we undermine ourselves, where do we continue to project old issues which are no longer that important, but we keep them alive in our psyches even though they may have happened ages ago, because the mind can't really distinguish reality from its own creations. So for the mind, it's very real, even though the actual objective event may have happened ages ago. Because the mind keeps repeating it, we keep experiencing it. So for that to change, we have to learn to stop reliving every event that's hurt us and recognise that they're in the past now, and sometimes we need to go through painful events in order to understand the greater depths within our psyche, or understand the need for responding with compassion, because compassion is born out of suffering. People who've never experienced any difficulty, who've never really experienced pain or suffering, often find it difficult to express compassion to one another. So if we have had a particularly difficult time, if we've had a difficult growing up, that doesn't necessarily mean that life is always going to be like that. We may have come from a difficult place, but at any given moment we have the option to transform that through changing our relationship with it, changing our perspective, and recognising that events from the past only have power over us if we allow it to have power over us. If we decide we're not going to allow that to happen anymore, we're going to get present with the wounds, face whatever pain we've been holding on to, and release it through acceptance of that wound and acknowledging that we can't change the past, we can only change our relationship to it, and we can gain wisdom from it by understanding where we're coming from and appreciating the strengths that are often born out of struggle. And the more that we do this work of transforming the shadow side, the more we achieve integrity, where we're aligned with truth. We're not trying to pretend to be anything we're not anymore. We're not trying to cling to illusions of being one thing when the shadow side of ourselves is clearly shown that we also have that destructive side within us. If we truly desire to not be feeling powerless or victimized, then we have to go within ourselves and acknowledge where do we keep ourselves in that victim state, by giving away our power to other people, by keeping old events alive within our psyche. Because we're the only ones who can truly heal ourselves. Other people can help facilitate that by creating that loving environment, but we have to choose to heal. Otherwise, if we don't do that, then we'll continue to repeat events in our life and we will never learn. And with Pluto going through Capricorn, we're also looking at things like legacy and whether the things that we're pursuing in life, whether it's be career, personal goals over a long period of time. Pluto in Capricorn is demanding that we be real, that we make sure that what we're doing is actually right for us. I mean, for example, if you look at how many stories you hear of people who thought the corporate world was the answer or was going to bring them satisfaction, and in the end they decide to leave it because it wasn't right for who they are. This doesn't mean that the corporate world is wrong for everyone. For some people it is the right kind of environment, but Pluto in Capricorn demands that we be true to ourselves. It demands that we face our own shadow power drives and face any tendencies we have to allow a desire for social status or desire to be accepted by other people to send us down the wrong path, to cause us to pursue a goal which isn't right for who we are. And if we keep pursuing things which aren't right for us, at some level we know it's not right for us because we feel that sense of discomfort, that sense of being fake or insecure about something, and no matter how much harder we work towards something, we still don't feel good about ourselves. But if we're doing something that's right for us, then doing the work of Pluto unlocks those deep inner fires of transformation. They unlock that fiery passion that gives that person the drive, that gives us that feeling of that inner power that no one else can take away from us. It's something that when we're connected with the core of who we are and we feel that primal connection with Source, then we don't need to engage in power trips anymore. We know that we're powerful. We know that power is not about controlling other people. Power is neutral, but it radiates from within us, and if we're connected to that power and we use it in an impersonal way that's designed to obviously empower ourselves but empower other people, because the highest level of Scorpio is mutual empowerment through personal transformation to rid ourselves of the dross and to get rid of any shadow power drives and embrace that transpersonal power, that phoenix power of rebirth, where we transform ourselves through the shedding of the old and the renewing of the mind. Pluto demands that we be true to ourselves, and this is a process that we have to go through if we truly desire to be powerful, if we truly want to be in charge of our life. Then we have to develop integrity, we have to be true to who we are, and we have to value truth no matter how uncomfortable it is. But what we often find is that initially we may feel averse to the truth because we know it's going to hurt, but once we've had that initial taste of freedom or liberation, once we've learned to embrace a rather painful truth, accept it and work with it, over time the process gradually gets easier as we learn to value truth more and more and desire the release of any false conditioning, any negative tendencies which prevent us from being aligned with our truth and prevent us from connecting with our true power within us. If we truly desire truth and we're prepared to accept the often painful revelations that sometimes come up when we need to acknowledge that we haven't been operating from our best selves, we have allowed our shadow side to take charge, but we also have the potential to change that. We can, by owning our own issues, by owning our own negativity, we stop projecting it, we bring those issues within us, and we use that alchemy of Pluto to polarize all the issues into the positive and negative, and through the light of consciousness shed the negative, leaving just the empowered side of ourselves. And this doesn't mean that we stop being dark, or it doesn't mean that we don't have shadow, but because we've illuminated it, we understand its contents. It's those contents, now that we're aware of them, no longer have any power over us. And when other people are acting up, because we've done this shadow work, we can understand what is going on within them. We don't get drawn into the conflict, or we don't we don't end up mirroring them. It doesn't mean that we condone their behaviour, but we understand what's causing it, and we recognise that it's not necessarily that person is bad, it's just they haven't dealt with the shadow issues yet. They haven't brought them into conscious awareness so that they're brought under control of the soul. Because that's ultimately what Pluto is about. It's shedding all of the egoic desires and learning to operate from the soul self, the true self, which connects us with everything around us and recognises the fact that everything is interconnected. So Pluto is breaking out of the personal and embracing the transpersonal, of recognising that none of us are necessarily more important than anybody else. We're all part of a great fabric of life, and if we want things to change, or if we want things to improve or become more empowered, then we're each and every one of us responsible for transforming our own base natures, of releasing our darkness, and through the power of love, self-love and self-acceptance, those issues then transform and they become like fuel for consciousness. They become wood for the fire of transformation that powers us, and they're no longer issues that will trip us up and cause us to act out of integrity. So there's a lot to take on board there, but the main thrust of it is that Pluto retrograde is an opportunity for each and every one of us to dig deep, to learn to maintain our integrity in the face of adversity, and to develop those deepest resources and deepest resilience in the face of pressure, and to learn to operate with integrity. So no matter what happens, we're not tempted to lie or share the truth or anything like that. We understand that if we want to remain in the flow, if we want to remain in grace, if you like, depending on what words you're particularly comfortable with, it's all the same really, but if we truly desire to be in the flow and have things manifest smoothly to us, then we have to get real. We have to go through the understanding of knowing ourselves, because if we don't know ourselves, then we don't know what we truly want, we don't necessarily understand why we do things, and we'll continue to operate in an unconscious way. If we truly desire to know ourselves, then this necessarily entails learning to accept some of the more painful truths about ourselves, but it's by accepting the truth that it liberates us and gives us the freedom to change things. If we resist the truth and try to ignore it, then it will just continue to persist and it will keep nagging away at us until we try and deal with it. So I hope it's a useful guide for Pluto retrograde. I put a link down in the box below to our website. We get all the other things that we do. But I hope Pluto retrograde is a time of significant self-empowerment for you, a time for significant self-revelation, and a period where your psyche is transformed so it becomes your ally rather than your enemy. Because the true enemy, or our deepest weaknesses, stem from ourselves and not necessarily from other people. So if we're prepared to work within ourselves to renew our minds and move them in an empowered direction so they work with us rather than against us, then there's not a lot that we can't achieve. We have to be prepared to put the work in. It doesn't happen automatically. So may Pluto retrograde mean many blessings and a much more empowered approach to life, through taking personal responsibility, through being true to who we are, and through pursuing any goals or building a legacy. There's an honest reflection of who we are, and is merely an external mirror of our core nature, our true nature. So may you get many blessings. Take care.